Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend History Story. This week I am covering the story of the Wallsend Coffee Palace, or Coffee Tavern as it is often called. Now I'm fairly sure that this is something that most of you will never have heard of and be wondering what on earth I am talking about. Well, it's definitely not Costa Coffee, that's for sure, but all will be revealed very soon. I hope you will enjoy the story. I also do have to say that this story is much more about the building when it was first built and opened than a full history of its life, but I still hope that you will find it interesting, as I know that I certainly did. December of 1883 was another one of those months when something new had been built in Wallsend and was finally being opened to the public. This time it was a rather large and impressive building. It was called the New Coffee Palace, although as I did say just a few minutes ago, it was sometimes called the Coffee Tavern in a lot of newspapers at the time. It was said to be 100 feet long and 70 feet wide, and it stood on the junction of the road which led from the Wallsend railway station to where it met the turnpike for North Shields and Newcastle. 3 stories high, excluding the basement, with its red brick walls, Queen Anne gables and tall chimneys, it stood out as something rather grand. It was also described as being something rather different compared to the rest of the buildings in Wallsend at that time. If you haven't already guessed, I am talking about the building that we now tend to call Greenways. The building that started its life as a somewhat impressive coffee palace. This corner was sometimes referred to in later life as Cafe Corner, and although it did indeed have a cafe on the ground level, it seems the main plus points of this new building were actually not the cafe, but I do think that the building quickly became known as just the Wallsend Cafe, as even reports in 1894 are calling it that, with the Coffee Palace or Tavern seeming to have lost its appeal. I have to admit to being quite impressed to find all this information, as the Wallsend Cafe is not something we have ever had much information about, and although sadly I don't have any old photos of the building, I hope the more recent ones will still help you to imagine how impressive it was back in 1883. It is worth remembering that the shop front end of the building has been altered quite a lot. When it was first built, you would have been able to see the tops of the basement area, which you can no longer see at all. This was another building that came about partly due to Sir G.B. Hunter. He really did seem to take a massive interest in the town, and he was always trying to help, either to build his own new properties or to help with the building of others. And I am actually starting to feel like we should have a statue to his memory in Wallsend. The architect was said to be a Mr. Cause, but there are no further details as to where he worked or who he worked for. The description of the building is as follows. In the basement of the building is the Coffee Palace or Coffee Tavern, which is accessed by steps directly off the turnpike. The room is also called the Cave. It is fitted out with marble tables and counters, mirrored walls and wooden seats. Although this does sound incredibly posh, you have to remember this is 1883, it then states that this is a place where the average working man can get a good cheap dinner along with the usual coffee and cakes. This first room is already making me wish that photos existed or that I could step back in time to see it properly for myself. On the floor above the cave is the cafe, described as a lofty and spacious saloon with windows on 3 sides, making it very light inside. The seats are red leather, and again it has marble tables and countertops. There are cosy corners with walnut and ash screens, making some areas a little more private than others. There are 2 fireplaces, and the floor provided by Walker and Emily is a marble mosaic design. There are also leaded quarry lights in the upper parts of the windows, which have interesting inscriptions on them, such as hard times, come again, no more. The building was also the first in Wallsend to be lit by electricity. Adjoining the cafe is the southern part of the building. Entry to this is from the station roadside. This area is said to be for the improvement of the mind and is described as an Athenaeum. This is basically a place which contains books and newspapers. This area also houses a games room. Members of the public will be allowed to access this area at a cost of 1 penny per week, or you can actually buy a season ticket, which will make the price a little cheaper. They must have been quite confident this room would be used, as a penny a week back then would have been quite a lot to spend for some people just to be able to read books, magazines and newspapers, or play chess or drafts. The upper floors are accessed by a staircase both from the Athenaeum and the Cafe. It is said that on one of the double windows of the staircase more inscriptions can be found. My favourite of these is one that states, "Step by step we are all going upwards or downwards." Once you reach the 3rd floor, you will find several large rooms, all separated by what they call revolving shutters, designed so that the area can be made into one large single room for use for concerts and similar kinds of entertainment when more space is required, but as separate rooms they are described as committee rooms, club rooms, a billiard room, and one which is described as being suitable for use as a lecture hall with space for a few hundred people to attend at any one time. Halfway down one of the staircases is what is described as a retiring room for the ladies, and above the ladies' room on the next flight of stairs is a smoking room. However, I didn't actually find any mention of a men's room, so men must have had to cross their legs or not drink too much. Above the 3rd floor is the accommodation for the manager and staff, but it also has several bedrooms available for use from £1 per bed. The idea here is that anyone coming to Wallsend looking for work can have cheap and comfortable places to stay. This is of course before Simpson's Hotel was built, although some of the public houses in Wallsend were also classed as hotels with accommodation which would have been available around this time too. The kitchens can be found on the ground floor behind the cafe and games room, and there are extensive storerooms in the cellars. Hoists are used to transport food to all floors directly from the kitchen. I am assuming this would be a dumbwaiter or something very similar. There are open fireplaces in all rooms, but the new steam piping for heating is said to be so effective that these fires will never be lit unless it is a special occasion or in cases of extreme cold weather. As if this wasn't enough, in the yard at the back of the building it is planned to have space to play kites and other similar games, with a view to expand and then add on to the building so that other outdoor sports can be played. The company who built the cafe are said to be calling themselves the Cafe Company, and they still have bigger plans with a view to adding baths and wash houses and more accommodation on the free land close to the cafe. Of course, this part of their plans is something that did not happen. It was also mentioned, though not stated where they were within the building, that classrooms were also provided with the intention that people of Wallsend could continue their education from where they had left off on leaving school. It does seem that this was well used from what little information I've been able to find out about them. Having listened to the description of the building and all that was inside it, it's pretty easy to see now that it was more than just a simple cafe. I actually think I would struggle to find a word to use to describe the building as a whole. Even Coffee Palace doesn't really seem to cover it. The opening ceremony was, as I said earlier, in December of 1883, the 19th to be precise. Many of the well-known townsfolk of Wallsend were there to hear the speech from Sir J.P. Hunter. He expressed his gratitude to the large crowd of ladies and gentlemen who had turned out for the occasion, and was pleased that Mr. Burt had consented to perform the opening duties. I believe this to be Thomas Burt, who was a British trades unionist and one of the first working-class members of Parliament. Mr. Burt's speech was mainly to wish that the hopes of Mr. Hunter would be exceeded and that the people of Wallsend would make very good use of this beautiful building. It was at this point that we finally come to the reason for the Coffee Palace being built in the first place, and it was said that the reason was not to make money. Although I am sure they would have still been more than happy to make lots of money, but it was in fact built for the working men and the people of Wallsend to be able to come to the Coffee Palace for harmless, healthy and innocent recreation, to discourage them from using the public houses, and it was made pretty clear that they disapproved of the public houses and the influence they had in their eyes over the working men of the town. Several other short speeches were made congratulating Mr. Hunter on the fine building and wishing him well. One unnamed person even went on to say that he knew of no other village or out-of-town place in the country that had such a magnificent building as this one, and that it truly was a red-letter day for Wallsend when it opened its doors to the public. The whole event was rounded off with tea and concert later that evening. Further information about the building is quite sparse, but I will include the little bits and pieces I have found during my research. The building was certainly used for court proceedings before the town hall was built, and I have often read of court hearings being held in the Wallsend Cafe. Of course, I now would assume that this would have been in one of the upstairs rooms and not in the cafe itself. Maybe worth a little mention is that the Wallsend Baseball Club had held a meeting in the cafe in 1894. They had recently won the Northumberland and North Durham Baseball Cup. A fire was reported in the reading room of the cafe in 1898, which was discovered by the then manager, Mr. Smith. The fire brigade were called, but it seems before they arrived, the fireplace and half the wall and floors had been pulled up by those inside the building. The fire had apparently taken a good hold under the floor, though it's not quite clear where it had started. Luckily, the fire brigade were able to put this out, and it was described as being very lucky that it had been found before the staff had retired for the night. The building was also often used as an auction house to sell or rent property in the Wallsend area, and I'm sure this would have been very popular as it would have saved people having to travel to other areas to buy something in their own hometown. Several meetings were held in the Wallsend Cafe, including one about the suffragettes in 1908. This was said to be so packed out that an overflow meeting had to be held in another building. These meetings seemed to be a regular thing, but I could only really find details of one further meeting held in 1913. Although I haven't been able to find a confirmed date for the closure of the Coffee Palace or the Wallsend Cafe, I do know that it still seemed to be in use in 1945, as the Wallsend Bowling Club were holding their spring meeting there that year, and in 1949 a whist drive was being held in the cafe. I will keep searching for more details, but if anyone out there listening knows the closure date, do please let me know. It is worth considering that the cafe part may have closed, but the building was still called the cafe long after the cafe had gone, so these later dates might not actually be much help as a guide to the actual cafe closure. However, after the cafe was closed, the front High Street part became Books Clothes Shop, then the ever-popular Grafton's, and it has also been the Oxfam charity shop, and in later years, as most Wallsenders will recently remember it, as Greenway's discount food shop. Sadly, it is currently empty, but let's hope that this will not be for long, and that the new chapter for this part of the building will be starting soon. I hope you have enjoyed this very brief history of this fabulous building, which as said is more a description of what it was like when it was first built than a real true history of the building, but I hope that you have still enjoyed learning something about it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.